Hi, it's Corey. Welcome to this episode of the See Jane Build podcast. Remember Sesame Street? I may be dating myself, but I'm hoping that most of you have at least heard of Sesame Street or heard of Elmo. They had a well-known skit with a song, "Who are the people in your neighborhood? Your neighborhood," please pardon my singing, where they introduced people like the grocer and the doctor and the mail carrier. Well, today, in this episode, we're going to talk about who are the people you need in your remodel or build neighborhood. Who does what? How do you start to figure out who you need, and how do they all fit together? I've done a new build and several renovations, and the configurations of these teams can always be slightly different. There are 3 C's of choosing any of your professionals: competency, chemistry, and communication. And frankly, these work for any type of professional relationship, not just home renovation. It goes without saying that you want the professionals working on your house to be professionals, to be good at what they do. In a perfect world, you might first connect with a potential professional through a personal referral, which would give you some level of comfort in someone's competency. Let's say you decided you needed an architect for your project. Have any of your friends recently used one they like or know someone who is an architect? Are any of the parents at your kids' school an architect? If your friends and family can't help you, I recommend asking a real estate broker. Even if you have not just moved, maybe you have the contact info for the person who sold you your house, or you know the popular brokers in your area. Brokers are usually very connected to all the professionals you might need for a renovation. When we built our beach house, we were introduced to our architect through our broker. The architect then ultimately gave us a bunch of referrals for who to talk to on the contractor front, and so on and so on. We still did the due diligence we needed to and checked references and looked at work, but knowing that we knew someone who would work with our architect felt great. And then knowing our contractor had worked with our architect, and in fact was currently working with him on another project, that definitely upped the trust level. If the professional in question is coming directly from someone you trust completely, then you can usually consider that a really good reference for their work. Otherwise, you want to make sure to ask for and check a couple of references and to visit some of their projects if possible. I know if people are living in them, that's not always feasible, but you can always drive by. When we were choosing an architect, we had our architect drive us past several projects he had worked on, and he would just walk us around the perimeter as much as we could and sort of explain the project, which was super helpful. Let's grant good intentions for a minute and assume that every architect and every contractor and every designer and anyone else you could need is good at their job. I know we've all heard enough horror stories to know that is not the case, but let's suspend reality for a minute and assume that it is, that all these professionals are good at what they do. It's equally important to have chemistry and good communication with them. You are paying this person, their firm, a lot of money, and we'll be working with them from anywhere from a few months to a couple of years. It's a relationship, not just a transaction. Is this someone you feel you can work with? We will talk about methods of communication more in depth later, but during the vetting process for your architect and other professionals, you do want to ask how the person in question communicates with clients on a regular basis. And also things like, are you a huge texter, but they on a flip phone? Do they never have time to respond to things during the day because they're so busy on work sites? The more you know, the better prepared you'll be. And I don't want to scare you, but one of the reasons chemistry and communication is so important is that even if I have the best experience with, say, a contractor, if I recommend that person on to you, there's no guarantee your experience will be as good if you don't have the same level of communication and chemistry. In fact, that happened to me twice. The first time was in Brooklyn. We wanted to finish our basement and turn the raw space into a playroom and storage room. We lived in a townhouse that was one of 14 new townhouses, and so everyone knew everyone since we all moved in around the same time. It was an amazing place to live and have a young child, as everyone was in the same boat. In fact, it almost felt like Sesame Street. There was no formal association or anything like that, but we all knew each other, and the houses were the same, so we shared resources and vendors. One of the neighbors had finished their basement, and it looked great, and so they had passed the contractor on to us. Another neighbor was interested as well, so that neighbor and I did our basements at the same time. It was great because the contractor could just rotate his subcontractors back and forth from one house to the next, and as a result, the project was more cost efficient than it might have been. We loved the experience, and the contractor, and all of his subs, so much so that we hired them again about 6 months later to do a gut renovation on an apartment we owned in Manhattan. But interestingly, the neighbor that was doing the project basically in tandem with us did not have as good as a time. They were slower to make decisions, tried to sometimes nickel and dime him on what he was charging along the way, and their chemistry and communication with each other was completely off. So even though we were basically doing the same project on the same house at the same time, we had vastly different experiences. Another time, we recommended our contractor from our beach investment property to someone out near there looking to renovate a property they had just purchased. The project began okay, but then midway through started to go off the rails. To be fair, some of it was COVID-related and the supply slowdown and price increase in building materials, but it turned out that the homeowners kept changing their minds about things, which meant a lot of change orders. If you don't know what a change order is, basically once a contract is agreed to, if you change something that was on the contract, it's called a change order and has a financial penalty attached. For example, we forgot to say we wanted a shelf in the wall in the shower in our beach bathroom, and we didn't really realize that we needed to be clear about it until the room was well underway of being built. Luckily, it was an easy fix, but it was still a deviation, and so there was a price associated with it. In this case, the homeowner kept changing their mind about various things, which not only increased the costs, but also slowed the project down even more than the COVID slowdowns did. Do you notice a common thread in these two examples? In both cases, the homeowner's actions were at least as much responsible for issues on the project as the professionals, which of course is why C. Jane Build exists. The more you know up front, the better prepared you can be at every step of the process, including hiring and working with professionals. Let's talk about the various major roles in a renovation or build. A lot of times you will need an architect. An architect is the person who's going to design your whole home or part of your home if you're doing a major remodel or new build. They have gone to school and are licensed in their field. Their job is to look at your existing home or your build site and the creative brief you give them. We talked about this in episode 3 if you need a refresher, and of course talk to you, and draw out options for your home. An architect's work product is a finished set of drawings that will be used to get any necessary building permits and used by the builder to execute the plans. Beyond just a floor plan of what room goes where and how the whole space flows, these drawings will literally include things like where the dishwasher goes, where the lights are in the ceiling and where the switches for them are, where the plumbing valves are, what windows will be used, how is the house situated on the site, etc. So many details. Contractors build their bids based on these drawings, and they build from them, so they're critical to get right. During the design process at the beginning of it, once you've hired an architect, he or she may also bring in other specialists to temporarily assess your site as it relates to the project. For example, a structural engineer or a land surveyor. Sometimes, instead of an architect, a homeowner may hire a designer. Unlike an architect, a designer does not have to be licensed. That person could come to designing through a variety of paths. Sometimes they did go to school for architecture, but decided not to take the exams to get licensed. Or they went for interior design, or they are completely self-taught. While a designer cannot do everything an architect can, there are certainly times that they would be fine to use based on the complexity and needs of the project. One way to wrap your head around it is this. In the medical field, there are doctors, but there are also nurses and physician's assistants. A doctor is always going to be qualified to see you, but there are many times when a nurse or PA will be just as good, even though they are not a doctor. Does that make sense? If you're just redoing a kitchen, for example, even if it's a major remodel, you likely can hire a kitchen designer and not an architect. But if you're doing a gut renovation of your home, or of course a complete new build, you want the most trained and certified professional around, hence an architect. Sometimes you might not even need an architect and you might only need a contractor. When we did our basement, because we didn't really need any permits, we weren't, altering any plumbing, any electrical, anything like that. It was so straightforward. Our contractor could do the drawings we needed because we didn't need architectural drawings. Either way, assume you need an architect or designer. That person is responsible for taking your wants and your needs and basically creating a strategy or a map for how that can happen. So you want to be really confident that you will be able to work with this person, and you want to make sure that you're going to feel heard. It's your house. And while, of course, their expertise is invaluable, you are the one who will be living there. I talked about competency in chemistry and communication. If you see some amazingly designed houses and think, wow, clearly that architect is amazing, make sure you're not just razzle-dazzled and you don't do due diligence and you don't check references and don't find out how this person works or how they are to work with. You need to know, what's their process? How do they see a working relationship? How do they incorporate your budget? Budget is huge, of course, and we'll devote a whole episode to it in a couple of weeks. But you want to make sure that you feel like you can work with someone, not just that you are astounded by their work that you've seen. Most of the time, an architect will also help you choose a contractor. They can't make the choice for you, but one, they can recommend people that they work with, and two, they can help you decipher proposals. Because remember, it's their drawings that the builders are working from when they give you a proposal. And once you get to the build phase, you have two options. One is to hire a general contractor or manage the project yourself as an owner-builder. A contractor is basically the same as a general contractor, aka a builder. Like an architect, they need to be licensed and insured. A contractor, working from the architectural drawings, executes the project. She or he hires or has on staff all the subcontractors like the painters and the electricians and the carpenters. He or she will also be the liaison with the building department for inspections that need to happen along the way. If you decide to be an owner builder, you will need to hire and manage all of the subcontractors. It's a big job, but if you have some knowledge of the nuts and bolts of building and know the people who are in those subcontractor roles, then it might be a good option depending on the size and the scope of the project. Sometimes, the design and build pieces get combined into a design/build firm. So instead of working with an architect and then bidding the job out to contractors, you work with just one firm start to finish from design through construction. This can work to your advantage for two reasons. One, you only have one contract, so fewer layers, less bureaucracy, and increased efficiencies. Two, it should mean that with both sides of the equation under one roof, the budget can be taken into consideration in a different way from the start, with less potential for budget conflict, like in the traditional design, then bid, then build model. But with design-build firms, you have to sometimes work a little harder to advocate for your own needs. The build side of design-build may not question some of the design choices the way a regular contractor might. This is a tiny example, but it should get the point across. I did a front door that was a solid door, but had a narrow floor-to-ceiling window just next to it. The architect wanted to put the window on the left side of the door if you were looking at the door from the outside of the house. But when construction started, the GC was like, this doesn't really make sense with the way the overhang of the roof is. If you put the window on the right side of the door is completely covered under the overhang so you won't get as wet in the rain. We, of course, agreed and went with that more practical solution. But the next time the architect was at the site, it was like a magnet drawing his eye to the door. And he was like, what happened here? This window was supposed to be on the other side. Yada, yada. If I had been working with a design-build firm, there's a chance the contractor would have just built as drawn and not even asked me about switching it up. Now also, every build or remodel needs someone to serve as a project manager, keeping the wheels moving, making sure that things are happening when they need to be, that decisions are being made on a schedule, etc., etc. You might assume that the builder fills this role, and you would be partially right. A good builder does do all of those things, but ultimately doing it for themselves and their business. In theory, this should dovetail with your needs as the homeowner, but it doesn't always. Yes, of course, the builder wants to do a good job on your project. They're not out to get you, but they are also running their own business, managing their staff and their subcontractors and the other jobs they're working on. If you are doing a big project, you want to have a plan for who will be your advocate. It can be you for sure if you have the time and knowledge, and since you're listening to this podcast, you should be in a very good position to do so. Oftentimes, once you move to the build phase and have hired a contractor, your architect or someone at the architecture firm can fill the role of project manager. For a fee, they do regular site visits, making sure things are progressing as they should, and are available to troubleshoot any issues that arise. If you're doing a new build or a major renovation, there's a chance you'll also be doing a lot of work on the outside spaces of your home, your yard, your patio, etc., unless, of course, you live in an apartment or in an urban area where outdoor space is rare. But if you're lucky enough to have a yard, you may also need a landscape architect to help design the space. While anyone, of course, can just choose flowers and plant them, if you're really being thoughtful about a new yard, or if you are making major changes to one, you might want an expert who can also look at issues around drainage and things like that, not sexy, but super important, and they can maximize your site's orientation and advise what kind of plants would do best. You might need trees or screening for privacy from neighbors, etc. If you're putting in hardscaping and or a pool, your contractor will still execute, but it may be the landscape architect that designs it, not the regular architect or the home architect, if it's an involved project with lots of plantings and trees and outside areas. Bear this in mind because you will, of course, want any plans that have come from a landscape architect to be involved when the contractor bids on the project, if the contractor is going to need to be involved in any way, because you want everything in that bid to be accounted for. You don't want any surprises down the road. So you have an architect or a designer, then usually a contractor, or if you're going owner-builder, you would hire out all the subcontractors directly. And there will likely be a need for at least one of someone I mentioned, like a surveyor, an engineer, a landscape architect. All of those take you from the outside towards the interior of your home. They're the infrastructure, if you will. Some people, as you know, will also hire an interior designer, also known as an interior decorator. This person would help you with what goes inside your house, the furniture, the rugs, the hanging light fixtures and or lamps, even the bedding and the knickknacks and other decor elements. Using someone who specializes in interior design can be super helpful if you have the budget, since they'll help you pull the space together and often have access to discounts and home goods that a lot of people just don't. They also can coordinate things like reupholstering furniture or hanging artwork, but unlike, say, a painter or a plumber, you don't need to fill this role. It's a luxury, not a necessity. Okay, so you have your architect or your designer who have done the plan for your project, and now you have a contractor who will build it. What is the relationship between those two? Well, it varies. At one extreme, there could be basically no relationship. The contractor takes the plans and builds from it, and any issues that arise are dealt with between you and the contractor. At the other extreme, the architect continues as a project manager in this phase, and you pay them to do things like have weekly site meetings with the contractor and to generally make sure things are progressing according to plan. In the middle, your architect can be available for an hourly fee as needed when the contractor needs to consult or when you all need a decision that was not originally agreed to. Which direction you go is pretty much dependent on you. Do you want or need your architect to serve in that project manager role? Or are you going to do it, especially if your contractor has someone on site as well? When we built our house, we could tell our contractor was going to run the project like a business. Plus, he was going to assign a project manager who was managing my build, and I think maybe about 2 others at the time. And even our architect agreed that we likely didn't need to pay him to serve in that role because with the systems the contractor put in place and my involvement, that was enough, and the architecture could just be pulled in if we needed to. But one of the other contractors my architect had recommended, who was also very good, had a very different work style and process. And if we had hired him to build instead, I likely would have had to hire my architect to project manage, especially given that we live 2.5 hours away from the build site. There are so many things that you don't know about the building or remodeling process, and you need to not be afraid to ask questions, which means the professionals you hire need to be the kind who will be responsive to those questions and not dismissive. The more educated you are beforehand, the more engaged you can be in the process, and so you are not feeling like you are just handing over all your money and your home to strangers and crossing your fingers and hoping that they get it right. And hopefully this episode started to give you a better sense of who does what, though it also may have generated more questions. We will go through more of this in future episodes, and you can always ask us any questions you have, either on Instagram or you can email us at info@cjanebuild.com, and we will do our best to answer them either in an upcoming episode or other resources we are developing or, emailing you back. We really want you to get the team you need to help get the job done right. Thanks for listening.